manufacturing and warehousing have shown growing uptake in robotics and automation solutions. We've seen that across the board. But now I'd like you to go to your, to reach to your own segments and tell me what's next. What do you think the next major category is for robotics? Where are the opportunities?
Yeah, I think for us, really the next exciting application is on the realm of X-ray generative that we talked about in the beginning of the talk. I think we are pretty sure that the platform and the industrial robotic platform that we're building is actually pretty good. To Etienne's points, that's just something that shows it's reliable, it's working, and development that is, I think, to a certain extent mature. We're looking at kind of rigidizing it for maybe forward deployment and things like that. But the real exciting area is how much can we make the job of the experts easier? And the promise that some of these generative models are providing is pretty exciting. So that's a significant portion of our development focus right now.
Mm-hmm. And then, Ellen, for you, I mean, this is a big area of manufacturing and warehousing. You've touched on that a lot through your work. What is it that is going to create the next major category for robotics? Ed talked about reliability, maturity. He talks about creating robust or rigid formation. Do tell me what you think is going to be where the opportunity is in your category.
Yeah, I think it's really around productization of the mechanical side of things, so that in terms of people just adopting the fact that this is the way certain processes happen, so you can buy an off-the-shelf machine for it, where the software can create the uniqueness within an application. We still haven't seen that. I mean, there's more and more equipment that has become sort of a standard off-the-shelf piece of equipment. Like machinery per se, but there needs to be more of that, because really adoption within the industry is still very slow. As much attention as the industry has, there is still a massive barrier to entry, just because there's not a lot of technical knowledge within the space, especially not as you get to some of the more rural areas, right? And that is what there needs to be a much bigger pool from manufacturing and from warehousing and distribution. Although there's been obviously a lot of highlights and a lot of growth recently, it is still just a drop in the bucket.
Mm-hmm. Etienne, can you also weigh in on this question? I'm wondering here as well. When I think about Vention, I think also I certainly think about cloud, and I think about software. Where are the opportunities then in terms of warehousing, manufacturing? What about design?
So I like to call the next 90 billion. Right, the next 90 billion is all the manufacturers that have not yet started to automate that will start to do so between now and 2030. And that basically double the size of the market for industrial automation today, because of all the folks that cannot participate, and because, again, not profitable enough with the current industry structure. To me, that's what I'm most excited about. And to get there, I think cloud robotics is the only way we're gonna get there. And I don't want to repeat myself too much, but if you're able to give the tools to small and medium manufacturers that can afford to pay extra services for design and for commissioning, and you give them tools where they're process knowledgeable enough that they're able to go to the act of design, the act of automating and programming, the act of simulating, and obviously the act of deploying those machines and operating them. And again, because they have accurate digital twin, the result translate one-to-one on the shop floor. And because they can share and reuse those building blocks that are developed across, a project over project with others, you really change how we're thinking about industrial automation as a whole. And, we've been on that journey for a little while. We see a lot of the cases taking place, but I think the big unlock is still a couple, a year or two ahead of us. And to me, that's what I'm most exciting. The robot arm the cobot was the trend of 2012 to 2017. I think the next big unlock is cloud robotics that really spark adoption to the masses.
Mm-hmm. And do you agree with Etienne in that? And how do you handle this pace of change, pace of technology change, really, without harming your everyday operations?
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with what they were saying. For us, it is actually, the pace of change actually is like built into our process. Like, we're constantly, we are on the 2-week deployment cycle. Like, that means every 2 weeks we're deploying something new to our robotic platform. The hardware itself on a 6 to 7 month cycle, right? So it's much more rapidly than traditionally the industry is. I think it just comes down to how you architect your platform, right? And what choices you make today. I think, talk about cloud robotics, right? So are you taking advantage of deployment solutions and things that existed in the software in the robotic world as well, right? So I think given that the speed of change is increasing, you need to architect your engineering team and also your product so that you can accommodate software change really on the weekly basis and hardware changes, on a matter of months, right? And that's just an architectural choice. You got to do it.
Yeah, definitely, more reliance on software, opposed to mechanical solutions for problems that could be solved in that way. Obviously, there's certain things that need to be mechanical in nature, but creating a more general solution that, can satisfy multiple needs and then fine-tuning it through software is going to help everything go a lot faster. And, in doing so, that ease of use component in the software is critical, because when I talk about moving more and more to software, you equally have to move more and more to ease of use, because in order for that to remain accessible, and usable at the end users who don't necessarily have that experience. And it's unlikely that we are going to be able to upskill the entire manufacturing base in order to program through traditional means. We need to make that accessible to them. So as we say, the industry really needs to move more towards software to make things move faster and be more flexible. We also need to be considerate of the fact that we can't just do that to end users and customers and expect them to be able to figure it out. So those two things need to happen together in order for it to be sustainable growth and really be transformative for the industry.
Yeah, one thing I would just want to add, I think, is along the same line. I talked about the hardware piece. Your choice of how you architect your solution in terms of hardware has huge impact on how fast you can change it, right? If you go through the traditional paradigm of assembly lines, if one component needs to go down, that means the whole thing goes down, right? And that's very hard to make it agile, right? That's why we went down the route of very much of a cell-based manufacturing, right? So that you can have multiple cells doing the same thing. They're achieving throughput through horizontal scaling, basically, right? But this allows you to every few weeks, take one of the hardware down and do a rolling upgrade without really changing and affecting the throughput. So there are things that you have to do if you really want to be ready for this rapid change, either with artificial intelligence or changes in the software, or even changes on the mechanical side, new end effectors, new sensors. You got to rethink how you were doing it. I do think a lot of assembly line thinking might go away for a lot of applications.
Means you don't want to disrupt your operation, whether it's for the initial deployment of that robot cell or as you're doing upgrade, as was just mentioned. It goes back to you need a real digital environment, right? If everything is tested, proven, the simulation engine on the real machine, on the physical machine, the simulation engine in the cloud is the same, you'll get the same behaviors, and therefore you're not going to make a mistake. Right, that's the only way to go. I think we're going very close to a world where deployment of machine cannot take 2 weeks on the ground when the line is shut down. Right, that thing will be a construct of the past. Remember when we shut down the line for 2 weeks to install an equipment, and everybody was working 20 hours a day to make sure those stories are about to go away as we're building more reliable digital environment.